This morning's reading comes from Mark chapter 8, verses 22 through 26. I'd encourage you to open your Bibles or your apps and put your eyes on the text and read along with me. Mark chapter 8, verses 22 through 26. And they came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him and entreated him to touch him. And taking the blind man by the hand, he brought him out of the village. And after spitting on his eyes and laying his hands upon him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see men, for I am seeing them like trees, walking about." Then again he laid his hands upon his eyes, and he looked intently, and was restored, and began to see everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, "Do not even enter the village." Arthur, come preach the word.
Thanks, Tim. We are going to be in Mark chapter 8 this morning, and we're going to begin in verse 1. And as we do so, we will see that this chapter begins with another feeding miracle, the feeding of the 4,000 this time. Different from the feeding of the 5,000, for sure, but similar in a lot of ways as well. Let's begin by taking a look at the text, beginning in verse 1 of chapter 8. It says, "During those days another large crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, 'I have compassion for these people. They've already been with me 3 days and they have nothing to eat. And if I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way because some of them have come a long distance.' His disciples answered, 'But where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them?' 'How many loaves do you have?' Jesus asked. 7, they replied. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground, and when he had taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people, and they did so. They had a few small fish as well, and he gave thanks for them also, and told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 were present. After he had sent them away, he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the region of Dalmanutha." Well, it is a different feeding, isn't it? Not the feeding of the 5,000, the feeding of the 4,000. And as Mark tells us, another large crowd had gathered. We've seen this before in Mark's gospel. There's always a large crowd gathering around the master. Several times we've been told this by Mark. This time they had nothing to eat. And this concerned Jesus, didn't it? He was worried about them, concerned for them, looking after not only their spiritual need to hear the word, but also their physical need to eat. And he says, it's been 3 days, and they have nothing to eat. Notice the phrase, "I have compassion for them." They might collapse on the way. If we're familiar with Mark's gospel, especially in the part that's coming up, the way of Christ is very important. And so here he's concerned that they might collapse on the way. Surely an indicator of what is to come. But yes, it is a lack of food, right? They don't have anything to eat. And it's been 3 days. Jesus thinks they just might not make it. But from the disciples' point of view, there's a major problem. This is a remote place, they say. Where can we get enough food to feed everyone? It's like Israel was in the desert, and yet God spread the table in the desert for them, didn't he, with no problem at all. Jesus has done this already, of course, in the feeding of the 5,000, and he'll do it again here. Again, similar situation, but different at the same time. This time they have 7 loaves. Jesus asks them, "How much do you have?" 7 loaves for a crowd of 4,000 men plus. It's not very much. In fact, it's not quite near enough. But Jesus takes what is available, he gives thanks for it, and begins to distribute it to the disciples so that they can in turn pass it to the people. They also had a few small fish, Mark tells us, and he gave thanks for them as well. Notice the 2 prayers here, for the bread and then for the fish. And they distribute those as well, and they never ran out. The food never stopped coming. The disciples went out and passed it out and came back to Jesus and refilled and went back out and refilled and went back out over and over again until everyone had eaten. The text says in verse 8, until all of them were fully satisfied. He'd provided more than enough food. We're told that 7 basketfuls were picked up. In the feeding of the 5,000, the word for baskets, it's interesting. It's a small basket. We would think something like a picnic basket, but not these 7. These 7, there's a different word used here. This basket is a basket similar to the one that the Apostle Paul was lowered down from the wall in Damascus in Acts chapter 9. This is a much larger basket. These are large enough to fit a man basket, and they collect 7 of leftovers. And then we're told that after this, Jesus simply dismisses the crowd, and then he left that region, going over to Dalmanutha. Dalmanutha is not mentioned anywhere else in Scripture. In fact, it seems like maybe it was another name for the same area of Magdala, where Mary Magdalene was from. Matthew chapter 15 tells us that after this incident, he passed over and landed in that area. So maybe Dalmanutha is in that area, very similar area there from where Mary was from. And so we see the feeding of the 4,000. The focus is on Jesus, of course, and on the disciples and on the people. But notice as we move into verse 11, the camera switches, and now we're going to take a look at the Pharisees. Verse 11 says that the Pharisees came then and began to question Jesus, to test him. They asked him for a sign from heaven. He sighed deeply, Mark says. Why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given to it. Then he left them, got back into the boat, and crossed to the other side. An insincere request is what we have here from the Pharisees, right? It was only to test him, the passage says. The word for test here means more accurately to tempt Jesus. And we know what that means if we are students of the Old Testament. You are never to tempt the Lord your God. The Israelites had made this mistake in the desert time and time again. And here the Pharisees are repeating their error. They tempt Jesus by asking for a greater sign than what he's been given. And let's just talk for a moment about the difference between a sign and a miracle, because the word they use here is sign. It's different from the miracles that Jesus has been performing. In fact, throughout Mark's gospel, every time Jesus performs a miracle, the same word is used. It is a powerful indication, right? It is an action that means mighty act. And clearly they were miracles. The mighty acts of Jesus, the Son of God. But those mighty acts have not been enough for the Pharisees. No, they demand a sign. What's the difference? A sign carries with it an inherent authority from heaven. Not only the power as a miracle would indicate, but the authority to do that miracle, right? What they want is some sort of proof that Jesus is who he says he is, a heavenly proof, a sign from God himself. In other words, the miracles of Jesus, they're not good enough for them. They're not good enough for the Pharisees. They reject them as evidence, which is really an amazing thing, and probably a good time to mention that the feeding of the 4,000 that we just saw, that's the 14th miracle reported in Mark's gospel. 14 out of 16 in all, by the way. Why is this important? Well, there's only 2 miracles left. Time is running out. The collective testimony of the many types of miracles Jesus had performed was not enough for the Pharisees, but their time was running out. This testing of him here arises out of a hardened heart. I mean, what kind of heart can see 14 miracles, if you're following Mark's gospel, and still demand a sign, authority? What you've done isn't enough for us. They refuse to notice him as the all-powerful Son of God. The all-powerful Son of God. Let's think about that description for just a moment. The powerful Son of God. That is, after all, the point of Mark's gospel, isn't it? Back in chapter 1 and verse 1, talk about a focus. Mark 1:1 says, this is the beginning of the gospel about Jesus Christ, notice, the Son of God. That's what he says at the very beginning. From chapter 1 to chapter 8, Mark has presented 14 miracles to demonstrate that very truth, that Jesus is the all-powerful Son of God. Miracles of healing, casting out demons, walking on water, the feeding of multitudes, and the restoring of hearing and the ability to speak for a deaf-mute man we saw not too long ago in Mark's gospel. And the response of the Pharisees has been simply, you've got to do better than that. I mean, come on, give us a real sign from heaven, something that'll truly rock our worlds, not these things that you've been doing. Is that all you've got? I mean, really? Is that it? That was their attitude. Hardened hearts cannot hear nor see the miraculous power of the Son of God. Hardened hearts can't hear the message. They refuse to listen. They refuse to see. They'd rejected not only the miracles and the message, but the messenger and the performer of those miracles, God himself. No wonder Mark says that Jesus sighed deeply. We can feel the weight of that sigh, can't we? Why does this generation ask for a sign? I tell you the truth, no sign will be given. The word for sigh here is very interesting. It's only found here in the entire New Testament. Nowhere else do we see Jesus do this. He does sigh in other passages, but if you look deeply there in the word, it's a different word. It's not this word. This word expresses frustration and grief and disappointment. Jesus clearly is touched by their unbelief, amazed by their unbelief. And once again, it's getting late for them to come to faith, isn't it? It's getting late. And notice Jesus says, why does this generation ask for a sign? The Pharisees are the ones who had asked for the sign, but notice that in response, Jesus calls out the entire Jewish nation and calls them this generation. It's everyone as a whole. The nation has missed the importance of the message. It's an all-inclusive term, yes. It's not just the Pharisees. They simply express the unbelief that characterizes, well, the majority of them. As Gary told us yesterday, there are some who have gotten the message, right? The marginalized, the outsiders, they seem to recognize Jesus and take him for who he really is. They've seen the 14 miracles, and yes, they've believed in the power of the Almighty Son of God. But not the majority. What would be left to convince them if they don't get it here? What else can Jesus do that he has not done already? The text says that Jesus just gets into the boat and leaves. No explanation, no further word. He just left. It's as we would say today, I'm out of here. He leaves because when unbelief is persistent and stubborn and hard in hardened hearts, as we see in the Old Testament several times, God doesn't hang around very long. It's up to us to recognize the importance of what we hear and what we see and respond in faith. Open ears and open eyes. And that's why now the text will turn to a warning issued to the disciples by Jesus because of this rejection of the Pharisees. And so the camera turns back to focus on the Lord and his disciples. Verse 14, it says that the disciples had forgotten to bring bread except for one loaf this time they had with them in the boat. Be careful, Jesus warned them. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. They discussed this with one another and said, it is because we have no bread. And aware of their discussion, Jesus asked them, why are you talking about having no bread? Notice his questions here. Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of pieces did you pick up? 12, they replied. And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many did you pick up? 7. And he said to them, do you still not understand? This part of the passage really highlights the danger of unbelief, doesn't it? It spreads to others. Others can be affected by it. It's like yeast. It just takes a little bit to work through the entire dough. The Pharisees and Herod had both asked for a sign, rejecting in unbelief the power of the miracles. And now Jesus is warning the disciples, don't make the same mistake as they've made. Only faith and belief can recognize Jesus for who he truly is. His questions reveal his concern for them, but not because they have not food to eat, as his concern for the crowd, but because they might miss the greater food, that of the Word of God. Don't make the same mistake that Herod and the Pharisees have made. Do you still not see? Do you still not understand? Those are good questions for us today too, aren't they? Do we see? Do we hear? Do we understand? Do we remember? There's so much meaning packed in that one single word, remember. Throughout the Old Testament, God uses it over and over again, especially in Deuteronomy, doesn't he? Don't forget that when you enter the land and you experience all of the good things, don't forget the Lord your God. Don't forget, right? Hearing, seeing, believing, remembering. Together, these are the building blocks of faith. These together lead us to a true understanding of who Jesus is. Which brings us to the last story that Tim read for us, the importance of seeing. What a story. This too is found only in Mark's gospel. This healing story of the blind man, you don't find it anywhere else. It's not in Matthew. It's not in Luke. It's not in John. It's only here. Because it serves to prove Mark's point. Interesting, isn't it? And curious. Because Jesus spits on a man's eyes and put his hands on him and asks him if he sees anything. And of course, the man couldn't see clearly the first time, so Jesus puts his hands on him again. A second touch. And then he can see clearly. Commentators wonder, did something happen? Why did it take twice? Did it not work the first time? Which is all rubbish. Of course, the all-powerful Son of God doesn't need to touch him twice, but he does to make a point. What you have seen up to here, what you have heard up to here, Mark's gospel, the first 8 chapters, it is important, but it is only the first piece of the divine puzzle that is the identity of Jesus. You need the second half of Mark's gospel. You need to, yes, get the first part, but you need the second part as well. No, this second touch is not a fluke. It's not a mess up. It's not an error. This is on purpose. In doing so, Jesus is pointing us forward to the need we have to continue to look at him, to continue to see him, to continue to believe and understand, because there's a piece of the puzzle that Mark has not really revealed yet. This one is the 15th miracle. There's only one left. Aside, of course, from the resurrection. But you know the other thing about this part in Mark's gospel? It is dead center in the middle, literally. It is a transitional story because it looks back on the previous 8 chapters and forward to the next 8, and it asks the question, a key question for the reader of Mark's gospel. What do you see when you look at Jesus? Do you understand? What do we see? Do we understand? Again, if we've been paying attention to Mark, well, Jesus is the all-powerful Son of God, yes. But there's something else. What is this second piece of the puzzle? What is this great truth we are yet to see, to fully open our eyes? Well, it'll begin with the next story, as we'll see. But let me give us a hint for what to look for in the messages still to come. It's about the suffering and death of the all-powerful Son of God. The Son of God submits himself to suffering and to death on a cross. It seems counterculture to the first miracle, doesn't it? The all-powerful Son of God who also is weak and suffers. Sounds like Isaiah's picture of the suffering servant in chapters 52 to 55. which, by the way, if we remember when we read Mark 1:1, Mark proceeds to quote Isaiah the prophet. So you already know that there is something else coming. It's not just the power of Jesus. Yes, it is partly, but it's also his suffering and his dying. This is the complete picture of Christ. No wonder the centurion at the very end of Mark's gospel, at the cross, Mark 15, verse 37, Mark says that with a loud cry, hearing, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus heard his cry and saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man is the Son of God." Two bookends, one at the beginning and one at the end, for who Jesus is, the all-powerful yet humble, willing to suffer and die servant of the Lord, Son of God. We need both to fully recognize him. And so for us, we need to be reminded of his power shown in the miracles, yes. But our eyes must also be opened, like the blind man's, to see his suffering and death as well. And only then will we clearly see. Only then shall we continue to be people of faith. May God bless us.